So today's presenters are Diana T. Myers as well as Mae Tree Johnson. Diana has over 47 years of experience in the field of housing and community development as consultant, director of private and public agencies, and through university and government-related research and training. She's a cum laude graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and also holds a master's degree in city planning from that institution. Ms. Myers founded Diana T. Myers and Associates in 1988 and is now the senior vice president. With DMA, she has worked extensively with programs to prevent and end homelessness in Pennsylvania, recently serving as chair of the advisory committee to the PA Legislative Task Force on Homelessness. Ms. Myers provides training and technical assistance to public agencies and private nonprofits and consults on housing planning and development for seniors, people with disabilities, and other special needs populations. She's been advocating for shared housing since her work with the National Shared Housing Resource Center in 1989. In December 2007, she received a partnership award from the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania. And we have Mae Tree Johnson. She's the Director of Programs at Home of Sparrow, where she oversees the 5 housing-related programs, including shared housing. In her previous role as Program Coordinator for the Shared Housing Program, she worked in the community to introduce and promote shared housing. Her responsibilities include all administrative and programming related to the shared housing program, as well as working with participants to establish and maintain healthy relationships. Mae Tree has presented at numerous conferences and trainings on home share, shared housing, and under her leadership, the shared housing program has flourished, expanded, and grown to be a successful housing option in Chester County, PA. Diana, now it's off to you.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here, and as you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about shared housing as well as other non-traditional housing options since we've been working so closely with people with special needs. And so I'm really happy today to be able to present this webinar, which was one of the webinars or panels presented at the Homes Within Reach conference this year. Okay. So just an overview of what I'm going to talk about and what Mae Tree is going to talk about. We're going to provide a definition, some of the similarities and differences between shared housing and other models, what some of the benefits are, and then we're going to talk about the 2 kinds of shared housing models, which is match-up and group shared residence, and then examples of programs, which is going to include a presentation by Mae Tree. Okay, so what is shared housing? I think people think of this in a very generic way, which is, oh yeah, I was in shared housing in my college dormitory and I'll never do that again, or I would love to do it again someday. Is it households who are doubled up that we find pretty much in the homeless arena these days? Would people living in a shared group home be considered shared housing? People living in a boarding home, other congregate housing model? And the answer basically is it depends. Shared housing has some very specific characteristics that would enable us to call it shared housing as opposed to some other option. So basically it's when 2 or more unrelated people share a home. That's the critical word there, is unrelated. And in those shared housing models, each person has a private bedroom and sometimes a private bathroom as well, but not always. The living room, kitchen, laundry, and other common areas are shared. It can be intergeneration, or it can be 2 seniors or 2 younger households or whatever. That can vary with the program. So what's similar than some of the other models that we just talked about? In shared housing, a group home, and shared living, all involve unrelated individuals living together. They can be nonprofit owned and operated, often are. Sometimes government funding is involved. And one of the key things about shared housing and group models like this is the physical structure may look the same. So you could look at any of these houses and they could be having different things going on inside that would be really what would characterize them as shared housing versus some other model. So how is shared housing different from other models? The two key characteristics that you can say would define something as housing, a shared housing, would be choice and control. So choice. Home sharers are often called a family of choice. This started back with Maggie Kuhn, who was the initial Gray Panther, and she was a home sharer. She started the National Shared Housing Resource Center, and she was the one who called this a family of choice. Even though the people are not related, they consider themselves a family. Key thing is that participants select their home sharers. But it should be very important to note that if you are talking about creating a shared housing program, that you really still have to comply with fair housing laws, which means you can't discriminate against people in one of the 7 protected classes. Control. Home sharers make the decisions and participate in the daily operations of their homes. This is really very important, and I think this is probably one of the characteristics that really distinguishes shared housing from other group homes. Whereas the people who live there, it's generally an independent housing model. I say general, I'll talk about that later, but it means that people are there by choice, and they are the ones that decide about whether there's pets, what rules there might be about overnight guests, whether they're smoking, whether they eat meals together, and other household policies, who pays for the cable TV, etc. So what are the benefits? Shared housing is a great model because it's very flexible. It can serve people of all ages and incomes, and it can address a lot of the demographics of the changing housing market. For example, we find out AARP does studies, and this is as long as I can remember, and you all know, she said, I've been doing this 40-some years. I don't think that's changed much in the time when I started doing this. AARP has always found that 9 out of 10 seniors prefer to age in place. So whatever they can do to enable them to stay at home is something that is a really good model for them. And it's flexible, again, because it's also cost effective, much more so than other housing models, because it uses existing housing model, so you don't have to put all the upfront money into purchasing a property and renovating it or being new construction to create a housing option. It uses housing that's in the community and also helps keep that housing in good condition. You may have a homeowner in a match-up situation that is having trouble paying their taxes or something, and they're deferring maintenance, and an extra income from a home share can make the difference in keeping that house looking up to par and meeting local codes. And again, it's cost effective because the housing rentals are generally below market rates, and again, helps folks meet their housing needs, and also can provide savings to the healthcare system. If you have a senior who's living at home who can, by virtue of having a home share and getting some extra income, it will defer them having to use maybe some other types of housing or other health care services. What other benefits? Again, self-determination and choice as something that's extremely important, and this is a model that provides that. Also provides companionship. Some people, as they get older, especially maybe an older person who's lost a spouse, is now living alone, they can really benefit from the companionship. And that helps them. We often find that having that companionship helps people stay longer in the community. I already talked about neighborhood stabilization. In addition to the individual home being able to be maintained better, it can reduce the turnover and vacancies and conversions that can actually affect an entire neighborhood if that property were to decline. Who is appropriate for shared housing? Years ago when I worked for the Shared Housing Resource Center, we did some research, and at that time they said, well, something about maybe 3% of the population is appropriate for shared housing. So this is an alternative, and I want to emphasize that. In my years of doing this, there is no single panacea. There's no single housing model or housing arrangement that is appropriate for everyone. People have different needs. They have different preferences and choices. So shared housing is for people who are flexible, accommodating, good communicators, people who are clear about their needs and expectations and yet sensitive to others and willing to solve problems together. So if a person is fairly rigid and really not interested in compromising in any way, they probably would not be appropriate for shared housing. And as Mae Tree will talk later, we have really good screening tools that can determine not only whether a person would be a good potential home sharer, but whether who might be a good match for them. So there's two shared housing models. The first is a group shared residence, and the second is a match-up. So group shared residence generally is a home in which there are 4 to 10 individuals who are living cooperatively in a large home. And again, we find out throughout Pennsylvania there are so many communities that have large older homes that are no longer appropriate for the families we have. It used to be we had 3 generations living in a home together, grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and the kids. That is not the case as much anymore. People are moving into smaller families and smaller households. So a lot of these large dwellings are really not being used. So this is a terrific opportunity. We've used rectories, old church rectories for group shared residence. So there are many properties that are appropriate for this. The group shared residences are generally owned and operated by a nonprofit agency. And they have 2 important roles. They provide property management. They own it. They make sure that the property's kept in good repair and so forth. But they also provide resident mediation services. And again, I'm sure Mae Tree is going to speak more about that. So, and again, group shared residences are often in existing properties, like I said, rectories or other large old homes, old funeral homes, places like that, and it also can be a property that is newly constructed for this purpose. That is less common, but certainly does occur. One of the characteristics of a good group shared residence is that they do have regular facilitated housing meetings. So on a regular basis, there's an opportunity for people to talk out any issues that may arise or conflicts. And it's usually a third-party outsider, often from the nonprofit organization, that will come in and facilitate these house meetings. Some group shared residents include the provision of meals, laundry, or housekeeping services, and some have case management or other services. That's more typically for group shared residences that serve special needs populations such as homeless or people with other special needs. Many of the group shared residences originally were for people who were living independently and just wanted to have that kind of affordable housing option in the community made available to them. So what are the challenges of a group shared residence? And you'll find that the first one is for both models, which is a resistance to the model by potential home sharers. Many of the home sharing programs were to serve originally seniors, and seniors who have lived in a certain way are much more reluctant to maybe give that up and consider another alternative. It is found in many cases that the idea of sharing housing must be presented to somebody 2 or 3 times, to seniors particularly, before they may consider it as an option for themselves. So it's not something that people will automatically jump at and say, "Oh, this is the idea for me." Sometimes they really need to understand and see the benefits to do this. Other challenges: possible conflict among the residents, and for the organization that's running a group shared resident, the lack of funding for a facilitator or mediator. If new construction or rehab is involved and there needs to be financing, you can get competition for limited affordable housing resources. You might have to go through the PHFA, the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, or the Department of Community and Economic Development, or local housing trust funds, or other sources that provide funding for affordable housing that are very competitive. And it is a lot of work for the sponsor. And finally, depending on the community, doing a group shared residence could involve NIMBYism or zoning battles to get the correct zoning for that property. However, it should be said here that there is some really good case law if the people that are being served are disabled in any way, and you can use fair housing perhaps as a way to make sure that there is no discrimination going that would be a negative effect for them to get the zoning they needed in a certain type of neighborhood. Okay, the other model is the shared housing matchup model. And again, there's two types of matchups. One, and this is the most common, which is the homeowner, which we call a home host or a home provider, has any number of different names. But that is somebody who owns the home and already has the lease and whatever, or it could be owner of already in control of an apartment. They then share the home with a home seeker or home sharer, depending on the language you prefer. The seeker pays rent, which is agreed upon with a provider, and this is really appropriate, again, for these overhoused households such as widows and widowers. It also involves two individuals. The second model would be two individuals who meet up somewhere, often have some sort of history together, and they agree to share or rent or purchase a home together, and they would also be, as long as they're not related, that would be considered a shared housing matchup model. This is a good model, and you'll hear later, Mae Tree is going to talk about her program, and then I'm going to talk about some of the programs around the country that are using shared housing for homeless individuals. This is the more common model for homeless. And again, they could meet some of the programs. There used to be a program in Chester County, residential living options, where they would actually sponsor social events to help introduce people that might then consider living together. That particular group worked with people with disabilities, and that worked very well for them. Okay, so some shared housing matchups involve an exchange of services. That is, again, more common when there is a senior as at least one of the members of the match, and that can involve some, small things such as the younger person may come in and would do the snow removal, the raking of leaves, the cleanup of some of the properties. In exchange, it could work two ways. The homeowner could provide meals. Maybe somebody would do the driving and go shopping. So this is really very individual, and it depends on the people involved in the match. And this is part of the discussion that occurs with the home sharing counselor when the match is first introduced, or the two potential home sharers are meeting. They can talk about what services they might need or want or be able to provide. Matchups, again, are generally sponsored by either a public agency or a nonprofit, and recent studies have shown that 46% of matchup programs do receive public funding of some sort. And I'm not going to talk too much about this, the process, because Mae Tree is going to talk about this, but there is generally intake, screening, introductions, trial period, and then the important part is a written home share agreement. Very important to these programs is the marketing, how you reach out to people, how you describe the program, who the potential matches are. And one of the things, and I think it's probably on the next slide, so I'm going to go there, is that one of the challenges, down to the fourth one, you need a certain number of people. You're not going to say, oh, we've got two people who are interested in home sharing, one homeowner and one person who's interested in renting, and we're just going to match them up. Matching is a very important part of this, making sure that people have the correct, and they're meeting their preferences and their needs, and that the things that they're looking for are a good match. So you really need a certain number of volume until you can start to make regular matches. So I think that's one of the things to consider, is that the beginning, the startup for a home share program may not have high numbers. because it's going to take a while until you get the volume enough to be able to make some good matches. Other challenges, like I said before, is the resistance to the model by the potential home sharers. People are very reluctant to have somebody else come and live in their home. That is one of the benefits of a public or nonprofit funded programs. I'm sure you've all seen ads in the newspaper or in your local grocery store or whatever, looking for a roommate. They do not have the benefit of having references checked and people shared and having a trial period and so forth. So it can be a very frightening thing, especially for an older person, to suddenly open their home to someone else. The zoning definition also applies to matchups. Some family, and it usually is under the definition of a family in the zoning ordinance, and some of them say that anybody more than 2 or 3 unrelated individuals are prohibited. So you need to check that out in the zoning ordinance. And again, see what you can talk to the town mothers and fathers about whether that is too restrictive, and see how you can deal with that in terms of making shared housing a viable option in a community. Third thing for any program, any housing program, again, there's a limited availability of dedicated funding sources. There's no funding source that I know of that's particularly for shared housing. Again, you probably then have to compete for affordable housing resources, but one of those problems can be that some of the sources for funding that are really for acquisition. They're for what we call bricks and mortar rather than for the service part. So you might be able to use that for group residents to purchase the property, but when it comes to just paying for home sharing, housing counseling staff or whatever, it can be very challenging. You have to look to some of the softer sources for that program. And again, sometimes to start up with foundations is a good idea. Local housing trust funds could be a usable source for funding a match-up program, since that funding is pretty flexible. I talked about the low volume. Again, good screening is critical. I sort of already touched upon that, but if you're going to have good matches that last for a long time, and shared housing is seen as a long-term permanent solution. In some cases, again, for some of the homeless programs, it is more of a transitional or shorter or medium-term housing response, but it was initially meant to be longer term. And so you want to make sure that you have 2 people that are going to be compatible. One of the things to recognize when you're doing a match-up program is that you're often going to have the number of people who are seeking affordable housing more ample than you're going to have housing providers. So what that often means is that your initial marketing for people to be involved in a match-up program should target on the home providers, the home hosts, the homeowners, to make sure you have some of them lined up, because it'll be much easier in most cases to find people who are interested in sharing and moving into another person's home. Another challenge of shared housing, again, like I said, it's not for everyone. It's probably not appropriate for persons with certain criminal records or history of substance abuse. That could be a very difficult challenge for a homeowner to take on. Again, this could be individual. There might be somebody who is very comfortable with that, and it's something that during the screening process you would want to look at. The increasing service needs of home providers, if you're dealing with seniors, again, who own their home and they start to decline physically or mentally during the match, it can be an issue. Obviously, it would be really important to have your AAA, your Area Agency on Aging, involved if possible. Make sure that they have access, if that becomes an issue, to call in your AAA staff to take a look and do an assessment, and they may be able to provide the services that the senior is needed in order to stay at home and stay in that match. So I think there are a number of shared housing programs. So I'm going to ask Mae Tree at this point to talk about her program. Again, she matches seniors with other seniors and intergenerational. And then when Mae Tree's done, I have a few other projects that are targeting homeless people and people with disabilities specifically that I will discuss. But I think, Mae Tree, you can take over the controls now.
Thank you, Diana. So my name is Mae Tree Johnson.
Wait, before you start, let me just say we're trying to make sure we have ample time for questions at the end. So just, you'll know that. Thank you.
So I am with Home of the Sparrow, which is an organization, as you will see, that we assist women, primarily women from all different ages in different housing programs. We assist over 500 women and children per year in all of our programs. And just to give you a brief blurb, these are some of our programs. We do an eviction prevention, which helps to keep working individuals in their households, supportive housing, which provides rental assistance, our pre-senior bridge housing, which is for women that are 50 and above, and our graduate outreach, which is just a continuation of those women that have graduated from the previous mentioned programs. The Health and Adverse Childhood Experiences really isn't a program. It's just a way that we incorporate health into our programs. But the program I'm going to be discussing, of course, is shared housing. And so our shared housing program was originally started approximately over 30 years ago with the YWCA of Chester County. And the YWCA pretty much operated the program working with women and men to secure housing options, give them different affordable housing options in Chester County, as Chester County is very expensive to live in. What we do is we have homeowners and home seekers. The homeowners are people that actually own the house, and they are the folks that will decide if they want to rent out the house for whatever reason. The reason could be for affordability. The reason could be that for companionship. So there are several different reasons why a homeowner would say, I would like to rent out my house. The home seeker is the person that is looking for housing. So that person is the one who says, I'm looking for housing, I need an affordable housing option, there aren't enough things for me to do in housing, to find enough housing. The next one is innovative solutions to preventing housing. That's how we look at shared housing. It absolutely responds to the affordable housing crisis in Chester County. You'll see from the next slide that in order to live in Chester County, an average income needed to afford a two-bedroom house, it's $48,400 a year. That's very expensive, and that knocks out a lot of folks. So people that are in the food services, retail, home health aid, and on a fixed income, it makes it very challenging. $27,640 is what we see in Chester County would be the average income for these professions. However, this doesn't take into account those individuals that are on a fixed income. So if you're on a fixed income, your income is actually much lower than this. We see a lot of folks that are making $1,000 a month on Social Security or disability or $900, et cetera. Thus, it just doesn't match up. So that's where the shared housing is a great option. So who is affected? What we see, the most amount of folks that are affected because of the lack of affordable housing are single women, single mothers, and older women. They tend to be the ones that are the most affected with poverty, et cetera. The background. So who benefits? How does it work? So who benefits? The simple answer would be the community. The background for all of this. Kind of got ahead of myself. The background is we started this program, as I mentioned to you, through the YWCA. The community benefits, single mothers benefit, homeowners benefit, seniors especially benefit. As Diana said, we have a lot of seniors that would like to stay in their homes, and their families would like for their loved ones to stay in their homes. But they're scared, they're concerned that they won't be able to stay in their home, primarily because of taxes, affordability, upkeep of the property, but also because of security. They don't want their loved ones in the home by themselves. This is a typical scenario of a homeowner. It can be a single woman, such as a senior, limited income, recently separated, divorced, or widowed, or widower. Our homeowners are men and women, and they're basically on a limited income. I'm going to give you a scenario of one of the people, Mrs. Walker, but instead of doing Mrs. Walker, I'm going to talk about Joe. And Joe has been doing shared housing with us for about 8 years. And Joe originally came to us because he was just looking for a way to make extra income in his house. He is about 70 years old now. He, at this time, has 3 women that are living with him. He has a 4-bedroom house. In the 4-bedroom house, he has his own bedroom and bath. The other 3 women share a bathroom. 2 of the women are seniors. They're above 65 and they're not working. The other woman is under 35 and she works. But this is a way they all work together in the house to make sure it works. It's not always smooth sailing, but it is an option. A home seeker. What we're finding is the majority of home seekers that contact us are single women that are unstable, experiencing unstable housing and housing insecurity. Most of them are over the age of 40, and they're also on a limited income or a fixed income. So once again, they're working at those retail jobs, or they're working as a CNA, home health aide, or receiving disability, etc. Here's another person I would like to tell you about, which is Nancy. And Nancy is a part of our group shared. We also have a group shared house for those women that are over the age of 50. And it is exactly how Diana described. We have 4 unrelated women that live in the house. They share common areas such as the living room, the kitchen. There are 2.5 baths in the house. Our agency actually owns the house. We repurposed the house as it was formerly for transitional housing. So it was already zoned. We didn't have to worry about that. We didn't have to do any real changes in the house because it was already set up for that. Nancy came to us as her house that she was living in was being foreclosed. As that was being foreclosed, she was in desperate need of trying to find a house and find housing, did not have a car, so her options were very limited. She was also only working part-time. With us, in this group shared residence, she was able to move in. We work with her on budgeting. She has since increased her hours at the house, at her job, but she can stay there for at least 2 years, paying a minimum amount of rent. Here, that house has everything that they need, the washer, dryer, it has all of the Wi-Fi, cable, free parking, etc. Okay, so here's how it works for us. Someone will call us or we'll get a referral from another agency saying, I would like someone to apply for shared housing, or it can be that senior that says, I'm looking for someone to share my home. We will ask them some preliminary questions such as, what's important to you? Are you looking for a smoker, non-smoker, pets? The usual things we do as a pre-screening. From there, we will send out an application. So once we send out the application, we get it back in. We then set up a time to either A, go out to the home and meet with that homeowner, or meet with the home seeker who is looking for housing. In that time, we talk about all of those things that are important in that interview. So we want to know information such as, are you an early riser? What's important to you? How do you deal with conflict? How do you deal if there are other people in the house? How would you deal if the senior has her grandchildren over? How do you deal with smoking? Are you a non-smoker? Do you want alcohol in the house? No alcohol. Would you mind if someone slept over, or do you not want them to sleep over? It's all of those questions that we ask. When we go out to the house, we're checking to make sure that the house is a safe environment. We have definitely had those houses where people have contacted us, and it really is a hoarder's paradise. So there are things all over. You can't maneuver. You can't operate. You cannot conceivably and comfortably live. So if the house is that hoarder-type house, we will not accept that. Once we get everyone, we get all the application, we've met with them, met with the homeowner, then we call that homeowner and say, hey, we have someone we would like for you to meet. We tell them about that person. They'll say, yes, I would love to meet them. We then set up the match. The match is where we start introducing them to each other. They sit down, usually at the homeowner's home, and they talk to each other just informally on what they like, if this will be good, etc. If it does look like it's going to be a go, we will then look at setting up an agreement, and all of our agreements are month to month. So it's not going to lock them in if it's not working. We set up that agreement with any of the initial terms, etc., and we will match them. The last part of the match, once they decide to match, once they move in with each other, is the maintenance. And the maintenance is really important because that's where we do any type of mediation. We've mediated on everything from the temperature in the house to taking someone's mail to placemats at the table, little things, but also big things. So that's where the mediation really comes in. We also do supportive services to maintain that match. We offer counseling, which is free of charge. We have a monthly newsletter keeping all of the parties informed on anything that's going on in the community so they're aware. And we also help, once they're aging, to do their senior subsidized housing applications. We will do that. The impact. So this just gives you an idea of, if you were to do 20 matches, how you can affect 40 women. It is great, once again, for companionship, for housing security, shared chores, especially for those seniors that cannot do the work themselves. This is a great option because you have someone that might be able to help them with snow removal, cook a meal, run an errand, take them to the hairdresser. It's a wonderful option. What our shared housing program does not do, we're not a caregiving service, medical services, or emergency shelter or legal services. We can put them in touch with all of these services, but whomever moves in will not provide the services. I think that's really important to remember, is that we cannot provide those things. And that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Again, we'll entertain questions in a few minutes. I just want to talk about a couple other models that our communities around the country are starting to use shared housing as more of an option for homeless individuals. And I just want to say that whereas the traditional models, the shared housing, the shared housing model as Maggie Kuhn envisioned it, is more traditional in terms of it's more staff intensive. The kinds of things that Mae Tree just described in terms of interviews and matching and counseling and follow-up, those are more typical of the shared housing programs around the country. However, due to the shortage of housing for homeless individuals and the need for affordable options, a lot of the homeless programs have started to try to look at shared housing as an option. And the goal in those cases is often primarily economic, and there is not the same emphasis on choice and control. And in most of those cases, private landlords are the primary resource. I have 3 examples I'm going to talk about, but first I want to discuss something I saw recently. In Massachusetts, they did a thing called Promising Approaches for Using Shared Housing to Prevent and End Homelessness in Massachusetts. And they looked at rapid rehousing in shared housing as opposed to a more traditional rapid rehousing model. And they found similar success rates, which I think was quite interesting. And in 2 agencies that they looked at specifically, they found that 80 to 86% of the people in shared housing who were homeless were housed after 6 months, and many of them lasted at least 2 years, or that was the average, I believe. And again, one of the things they found is because the rent in Massachusetts is so high that the matchups actually lasted longer and were more permanent because this was a long-term affordable housing solution. They looked at what made this a promising practice and what things that they would recommend for people starting shared housing for the homeless. A couple of things they came up with is that it should be provided to people as an option. So if you're you're doing an emergency shelter and you're talking about people and their housing, introducing that as a possibility is an important step. I know often the people's reaction, especially if they've been in a shelter, is, I don't ever want to live with anybody else as long as I live, having been in a shelter or whatever. However, in the right circumstances, if they can find the right match, that can be really the most affordable and long-term housing solution available. Some of the programs in Massachusetts they looked at, again, they didn't have staff, specifically home sharing staff, but what they did is they helped the people find roommates with ads using internet sites and agencies serving serving seniors and other special needs populations. They really looked at shared housing as a business arrangement as opposed to the more companionship and sharing and things that we've been talking about. They did find, even in those programs, however, that mediation is very important. So I'm just going to quickly go through these 3 programs. Back to this. Friendship Places in Washington, D.C., and again, it's shared housing for the homeless. It's a match-up program. 2 housemates get together and share an apartment. And again, they find out that one of the reasons this works well is that people have a common experience with homelessness, so that they can use that to build on a relationship. They've been using, in some cases, short-term leases. And one of the things that they emphasize with the Friendship Place or the nonprofits is not part of the tenant-landlord relationship. They pretty much stay out of it. They make the relationship between the landlord and the 2 folks who are sharing. And I think one of the things they love about it is they see it as a neighbors among neighbors rather than a facility for homeless people. They do make sure that people understand the responsibilities of going into a new housing relationship and that they are prepared to fulfill that responsibility. The Micah Ministries, as it sounds, is a faith-based organization, and they started serving people who were street homeless. And they started with addressing their basic needs, but shortly thereafter, especially since they were dealing with a lot of chronically homeless, they found that affordable housing was so critical. And in 12 months, they've actually found housing for 81 homeless through a match-up, through shared housing. Again, they were working mainly with chronically homeless, and so that meant that they were looking at support services as well. They were helping them with in-home care, skill building, and they also, again, like the other programs, have negotiation of conflicts and things, helping them resolve a conflict, like getting a mini refrigerator for each home share, things like that could be solved to help that become a viable match. One of the things that they did was they tried to get separate leases for each home sharer with the landlord rather than a single lease, so that if one left, they could then send somebody else to live there. Again, that is, like I said in the beginning, not as big on choice as the traditional shared housing model, but it certainly provides a good alternative and affordable housing. The third shared housing center group in residence in Dallas, Texas, was for homeless, and their organization's mission is to offer housing options and supportive services that foster independence, empowerment, and self-worth, and serve a multicultural, intergenerational population, including the homeless and other special needs populations. So they came to this from a very sort of broad-based multicultural idea. But they got the group residents, which they were able to rehabilitate, and they find that it is longer-term residency. They do have a safety network of supportive services that are involved, that are available for the residents of the group shared residence. Each person has a private bedroom and bath. They commit up to 12 months, and they do serve a lot of homeless single parents with children, as well as older adults. So this is an intergenerational group shared residence. Okay. One other thing is to talk about a little bit shared housing programs that target people with disabilities. This is people with disabilities and their families. This was a very interesting model called Partners for Housing, and it's found in Washington State. And it's basically families working together, families and their disabled family member working together with other families in a collaborative way, and that through those relationships and through the organization, the organization helps them to get together and find other families that they can create a match-up situation with the family member with a disability. It's a really nice model, and they provide a range of other services such as caregiving, meal preparation, shopping, medication management. They help to plan social and recreational activities. They provide transportation, representative payee services, and benefit coordination for people with disabilities. So finally, shared housing models provide additional choices. It is non-traditional. A lot of people are not either ready or willing or interested in other types of models that are available. They don't want to. Some people don't want to move into a high-rise. They don't want to move to an urban area. They're not ready for institutional living. They love staying in the community, and this is one viable option for that. Okay, and I think we're ready for questions and answers.
Great. Thanks so much, Diana and Mae Tree. Really appreciate your time. So now we're going to open it up for questions. Since we have a good amount of people on this call, if you have a question, either press *6 or you can type your question in the chat box on the lower left-hand corner of the screen. So again, *6 or chat box. I see Shelby Kearney, you have your hand raised. If you want to go ahead and press, *7, if you want to go ahead and press *7 to unmute yourself. Do you have a question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, we can, yes.
Hi, I'm just trying to figure out how much does each resident pay? It probably varies depending on the facility, or not facility, house.
Mae Tree, do you want to talk about your program,
Sure.
and then I can talk about
Sure.
some of the others? Mm-hmm.
So for us, it depends. If it's a match-up, we tend to range from $400 to $550. That's the limit we put on. If it is that group shared residence, they pay $300, and that includes everything. So that includes the washer and dryer, electric, cable, Wi-Fi, everything is included.
What about, is food separate?
The food is separate at all of the places, yes, because at the group shared, it's similar to what Diana was saying. They have a choice. So in that house, it's a huge kitchen with 2 refrigerators, 2 microwaves, and the residents there, they just happen to all get along, so they might go in on a Sunday meal. I know they just did Easter meal together, but they all are responsible for their own food.
Do you have like separate areas for the food? Like does everybody have their own cubby or section of the pantry for their
Yes.
own personal stuff? Yes?
So
Okay.
in the matchup, how it works there is, say a family has the regular kitchen, they usually will give the seeker space. So they say this part of the shelf is all of yours. You have this cabinet. They'll do the same thing in the refrigerator usually. They'll say you have this shelf in the refrigerator, this shelf in the freezer. At our group shared residence, since it's 2 refrigerators, they definitely have more space. So one person tends to take up X amount and et cetera. But they absolutely usually divide it up. What we find in the group shared, because they all kind of get along, there's rarely, I think we've only had one time where it was someone ate my food, but usually they're pretty good with that.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Thank you.
That is, when early on, that was like the big question that people had, and that early on was often the source of greatest conflict, people eating other people's food or whatever. So that's a great question. I just want to weigh in also on the rental. I think that from what I hear, that's a fairly typical number, $300, $400, $500 a month. Some of the programs, if they're getting subsidies from the government for the program, they will limit it, for example, to 30% of a person's income. And in case you're not aware of this, shared housing is an acceptable model for public housing authorities for rental assistance. If they have to adopt this in their administrative plan, there's a little box to check and says, yes, we allow shared housing. And then they pay us a portion of the efficiency rate. So that can be really helpful to the homeowner to get a little higher rate, whereas the home sharer can still pay 30% of their income, the homeowner can get a little more to support the cost of the house.
Nice, nice. Thank you, ladies. Thank you.
Welcome.
Great. So we have several questions actually that just came in the chat box. So we have one from Megan who says, can you tell us a little more about how this works with families with children?
Do you have any of those? Yeah.
Okay. So for us, we've definitely had families with children that have decided for whatever reason, usually it's financial and paying the taxes. And how it works is if a person is moving in and there are children in the household, we absolutely have to do a child abuse. We automatically do criminal background checks on everyone, but if they are moving into a house where there are children, we must do a child abuse clearance. Once we do that, when we do the initial meeting, we want the children to be there because you want the children to be on board too. Usually, another thing that we have found, we had one where the seeker that moved in became the pseudo-grandmother. So it really worked out well because that family did not have a relationship with their grandmother. She became that grandmother, and I believe she's lived there for about 2 or 3 years with the family.
Great. We have a question from Allison. Is there a list of agencies that do match-ups in Pennsylvania, and are there agencies that focus on people who have disabilities?
Sorry. Is there a list of agencies? There is not a list of agencies that do match-ups in Pennsylvania because there's very few of them. I think the only one other than Mae Tree is Bucks County, I think, has a program. There is something called the National Shared Housing Resource Center in Vermont. If you go on the Internet and you just type that in, you can find out they do have a listing of the various programs around the country, which I have looked at, but Mae Tree is the primary. The other person that does shared housing match-up in Pennsylvania that I'm aware of is the YWCA of Harrisburg. Julia Hoskins does that program there. Other than that, we had started one in Montgomery County many years ago. Unfortunately, that was defunded. And what was the second part of that?
And are there agencies that focus on people who have disabilities?
Again, the one in Pennsylvania that used to do that was Residential Living Options in Chester County. and Delaware County. Mae Tree, do you know if they're still around? I think that
No,
they
what happened is they kind of merged with handicrafters, so a lot of times they'll call us and we'll partner with them, but they're no longer an official residential living options.
The other one is CHAPS, Crawford Housing something or other in Crawford County. They do a group shared residence for people with serious mental illness. And so they do have that for people with disabilities. And the other thing, there is something called the Fairweather Lodge, which would be considered a group shared residence model. It is specifically for people with serious mental illness and involves people both living together and working together. And there are some 20 or 30 of them. Many of them are in Erie, Pennsylvania. They were very aggressive in doing this, but there are fair weather models throughout the state. And if you need more information on that, you can contact the Pennsylvania Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services in Harrisburg. They could connect you with the folks that are working on fair weather lodges for people with mental issues.
Great. Thanks, Diana. We have a
Welcome.
question from Joshua, who is asking, what is the average time frame from initial interest to moving in, and how many weeks does that usually take?
So for us, it really depends. If it is someone that is very flexible on where they can live and they have a car and the money isn't really the primary reason, we can pretty much turn it around from the time they do their application and meeting within the matter of a couple of weeks. If they are very specific on the area they want to be in, or they want certain other things such as I only want to be in a house where there are no children or there are no stairs, it becomes a little bit more challenging. But if they're flexible and open, as Diana mentioned, that flexibility, we can move it and turn it around in a couple of weeks. I think the fastest time we've ever done a match would be 1 week. From the time of getting the background checks and everything, it was a week.
Wow, that's amazing. Mae Tree, I wanted to ask you a question. Do you have trial periods?
Well, since we do the month-to-month, that kind of acts as our trial period. I think only one where someone said, I want to try it out and have the person come stay over a couple of nights just to see, and we did allow that. And that was a senior. It's funny, you had mentioned how sometimes it takes 2 to 3 times before they say yes. It was one of those where the person was really scared, and that's why she wanted to do the trial.
Did it work out?
It did, actually.
Yay.
The person did. It did.
Thanks.
I think we have time for one more question. So we have one from Chuck that says, do the homeowners have to pay taxes on the income from those who are sharing the home?
So for us, what we tell everyone is for them to talk to their accountant or whomever they use. We do not say to them, we want to make sure you're filing this. That is definitely strictly up to them. However, we do encourage them to talk to their accountant or whoever is their tax preparer. So that's how we suggest and work with that.
Great. We do have, I'm noticing down here, we do have a couple of questions or comments about, do you have any examples of like screening processes or questionnaires, assessments, those kind of things that you can share? I don't know. I would be willing to send that out to the group if you have any examples of those.
We can definitely send you, so that's not a problem.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Diana and Mae Tree, for getting on the call today. This was a great topic, and thank you also for everyone who joined us to hear about this topic. And I hope that everyone has a happy weekend.
Can I just add, I see that there's some other questions. If you forward those to us, we can try to answer them after the call.
Perfect. I will do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity to share something we're passionate about. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for getting on, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
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 Thank you. Please stand by.